Rain hammered against the windows of Ridgeview Tavern, shaking the old glass like someone was pounding to be let in. Inside, the place smelled like wet jackets, cheap beer, and long stories no one really wanted to hear. In the far corner, a woman sat by herself, hood pulled low, hands wrapped around a mug of plain black coffee that had gone cold a long time ago. She didn't talk. She didn't look around. She just sat there with a kind of calm that didn't match the storm outside. A group of off-duty contractors near the bar noticed her. Big guys, loud from payday drinks, the type who talked tougher the more they laughed. One pointed toward her sleeve where a faint, sharp-angled tattoo peeked out. "Bet she got that on spring break," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The others burst out laughing. She didn't react. Not a flinch, not a word. Something about that silence bothered them more than if she had yelled back. Behind the counter, the bartender glanced her way. His face tightened just a little, like he knew there was more to her than what they saw. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Leah Hartley looked like the kind of person most people forgot as soon as their eyes moved past her. She kept her hood up, shoulders relaxed but straight, the same way someone sits when they're used to long nights in crowded rooms. Early 30s, lean, quiet, not trying to draw attention from anyone. If anything, she looked tired. The kind of tired that sits deep in the bones, the kind you don't fix with sleep. Most civilians would glance at her once and move on. They wouldn't see the way her eyes tracked the exits without really looking at them. They wouldn't notice how she lifted her coffee cup the same way every time, like her hand understood steady movement better than anything else. They wouldn't see how her back never touched the chair, not even for a second. She didn't fidget, didn't slouch, didn't shuffle like someone waiting for a ride. She just existed with a level of control that didn't match her small corner or her plain clothes. That was Sergeant First Class Leah Hartley, though no one in Ridgeview Tavern knew that name anymore. After leaving active duty, she worked quiet contract tech jobs here and there. Nothing flashy, nothing that put her in a crowd. She stayed under the radar by choice, not because she was hiding, at least not in the way people might think. She just preferred spaces where no one expected anything from her. But even sitting alone, her presence carried a certain stillness that didn't belong to someone fragile or unsure. It was the kind of stillness that made people look twice without knowing why. Across the room, the three men who would become the trouble of the night didn't have that kind of awareness. Brandon Pike, wide shoulders, loud voice, insecurity hidden under cheap jokes, led the pack. He was the type who bragged about tough jobs he'd seen, but never mentioned the ones he avoided. His voice filled the bar whether people wanted it to or not. Next to him sat Tyler Brooks, the sidekick who pushed every joke a little further just to see if someone would laugh. Tyler never started trouble, but he liked to warm it up for whoever did. He watched Brandon like a younger brother waiting for permission to bark. Then there was Mason Diesel Heron. Skinny, pale, with the kind of beard that made him look older from a distance but younger up close. He smiled too big, laughed too hard, and jumped in at every chance to impress Brandon. Diesel wasn't dangerous, he just wanted to be. He relied on sarcasm to feel bigger, louder, tougher. Together, the three of them created a kind of noise that didn't match the storm outside. A loudness without weight, bravado without story. They thrived on attention, pushing each other to keep talking, keep joking, keep filling the room with anything that stopped the silence from settling in. It was this noise that kept drifting toward Leah's table, even though she wasn't looking at them. She could hear them. Her senses were too sharp not to, but she showed no sign of it. Her breathing stayed even. Her hands didn't shake. Her posture didn't change. If anything, she seemed to grow quieter the louder they got. Behind the counter, Pete Rollins wiped down a glass and watched the scene with a tightening jaw. Pete had grown up with stories from his father, who had served in Vietnam. He knew how real soldiers walked, how their eyes moved, how their shoulders settled. He knew the difference between someone trying to look tough and someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. Leah fit the second category, even if no one else in the bar recognized it. Pete couldn't place it, but her silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like something held back, something controlled. When a person sat that still, that aware, it meant something. And Pete had seen enough bars, enough faces, enough nights to trust the feeling crawling up his spine. He caught Leah's eyes once. Just a flicker. She didn't hold his gaze long, but it was enough for him to know she saw everything. The door, the customers, the hands in pockets, the shift in tone from the men nearby. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared. For what, Pete wasn't sure, but it wasn't the kind of readiness that came from expecting a fight. It was the readiness of someone who had been trained not to be surprised. Even so, to everyone else in the room, Leah was nobody. A tired, quiet woman sitting alone. Forgettable, easy to overlook. And that misjudgment hung in the air like smoke. Brandon noticed her again when Tyler nudged him. "She hasn't moved," Tyler said, like it was strange. Brandon glanced over, smirked, and shrugged. Probably scared to look up. Diesel snorted and tossed out a joke that wasn't funny, but the others laughed anyway. From Leah, nothing. No reaction, no shift. Just that same calm, that same steady presence they didn't understand. Pete saw the way Brandon's eyes lit up with the kind of interest he hated, the interest of a man who needed to prove something to himself. Pete tried to step into the conversation, easing his voice in, offering another round, trying to move their attention anywhere else. But Brandon's group was already circling the idea of an easy target. They didn't know Leah's past. They didn't know where she came from. They didn't know what that small tattoo really meant, and the quietness they mistook for fear was about to show them just how wrong they were. But for now, Leah sat alone, her hood low, her hands calm, her eyes steady. To them, she was forgettable. To Pete, she was a warning, and to the night ahead, she was the moment everything would change. The longer the night went on, the louder Brandon's group became. Their drinks emptied faster, their jokes got sloppier, and their confidence grew the way it usually does when men like them think the room belongs to them. They didn't look around to see who they might be bothering. They didn't care. The storm outside seemed quieter than the noise they made every time they slapped the table or burst out laughing at another half-formed joke. At some point, Brandon leaned back on his stool and caught sight of Leah again. The faint shape on her forearm, two clean, intersecting angles, slipped just far enough out of her sleeve to show more clearly. The tattoo was simple, sharp, nothing decorative about it. But to Brandon, Tyler, and Diesel, it looked like a perfect target. "There it is again," Brandon said, pointing. "That little Pinterest warrior tattoo." Tyler laughed so loud it startled the couple sitting near the jukebox. Diesel leaned forward, squinting like he was looking at a rare animal. "Bro, it's so tiny. What does that even mean?" "Yoga class achievement unlocked?" Their laughter hit the walls hard and bounced back. Leah didn't lift her head, didn't look their way. Her fingers rested around her cup with the same steady hold as before. But she did speak, quietly. "Only, please. Don't do this." 5 simple words. No edge. No threat. Just a warning spoken with surprising softness. And Brandon took it exactly the wrong way. "Oh, she's scared now," he said, puffing up his chest. "Relax, sweetheart. We're just having fun." Tyler elbowed Diesel. "Look at her. She won't even look at us. Probably thinks we're going to take her lunch money." The crowd shifted the way crowds do when trouble is starting but hasn't fully arrived. Half the people ignored it, choosing to pretend they didn't hear anything. A few smirked, waiting to see if it got interesting. Others looked uncomfortable, but stayed seated. The kind of quiet tension that hangs heavy when everyone senses something is off, but no one wants to be the first to speak. What would you have done in that moment? Most people believe they would speak up. But bars like this one have a way of showing the truth. Most stay silent and hope things sort themselves out. Tyler suddenly got brave and stepped closer. "Hey," he said, leaning down toward Leah. "Let's see the whole thing. Bet it's some cute little symbol." He reached for her hood. He didn't even get close. Leah moved only her wrist. Not fast, not aggressive. Just a clean, controlled motion that redirected his hand away as if she were guiding him away from a hot stove. He stumbled a little, confused by how easily she'd stopped him without even raising her voice. "Whoa," Tyler laughed nervously, rubbing his wrist. "She's got moves." Diesel grinned. "What was that? Like a self-defense class?" "Don't mess with the coffee ninja." The bar let out a soft, uneasy ripple of laughter. Not enjoyment, discomfort. People were starting to realize something wasn't right about the way she handled that. Too clean. Too practiced. Too natural. Would you have stayed quiet or stood up for her? Most people don't realize how much silence weighs until it fills a room. Brandon stood now, rolling his shoulders like he was getting ready to lift something heavy. He wasn't athletic, but he carried himself like a man who believed size alone made him dangerous. He walked around his table slowly, circling the space like he was approaching a cornered animal. The smirk stayed on his face as he moved closer to Leah's table. Pete behind the counter felt his stomach drop. He set the glass he was drying down and took a small step forward. His fingers wrapped the edge of the bar, knuckles whitening. He knew he wouldn't win a physical fight against 3 younger men, but something deep in his gut told him he might have to try. Brandon stopped just behind Leah, towering over her chair. "You hear me talking to you?" he asked, his voice dropping into that low, challenging tone men use when they want a reaction. Leah didn't turn. Didn't blink. Didn't show any fear. She simply lifted her eyes to meet his reflection in the glass of the window beside her. Calm. Quiet. Almost detached. That stillness, that unwavering calm, was what unnerved the room. Fear usually came with trembling hands, tightened shoulders, quick breathing. Leah had none of that. It was as if she knew exactly what would happen next and wasn't worried about any of it. Brandon misread everything. "What's with the attitude?" he said, leaning closer. "I'm just asking about a tattoo. Relax." "It's fine," Tyler called from behind him, trying to sound helpful. "Just show it. Prove you're not being weird." Leah didn't move her hands from the cup. She didn't push back her sleeve. She didn't apologize, argue, or explain. Her silence turned the air heavier. Pete swallowed hard. He'd seen men walk into bars with quiet eyes like hers, men his father once described in stories that ended in either medals or funerals. He could feel that same tension now, buzzing through him. The others in the bar noticed it too. A couple at a side booth fell completely silent, forks halfway to their mouths. Someone near the entrance shifted uncomfortably. Even Diesel stopped laughing. Brandon took another step around the table, trying to block her in. He didn't realize he was the one being watched now, not by Leah but by everyone else. His swagger was slipping, replaced by something meaner and more desperate. "Come on," he said, reaching toward her sleeve this time. "Let me see the little mark. Bet it's nothing." Leah's voice came out soft again, level and steady. "I asked you not to do this." Her tone wasn't scared. It wasn't angry either. It was the kind of tone someone uses when they've already decided how far they're willing to let something go. Brandon didn't hear it. Tyler didn't understand it. Diesel didn't respect it. But Pete did, and one older man by the door did. And a woman sitting alone with her lunch barely touched did. They felt the warning buried in her calm, the same way animals feel a storm in the air. Brandon leaned even closer, almost whispering, "What are you going to do about it?" Leah blinked once. Nothing more. She didn't stand. Didn't shift her weight. Didn't raise her hands. She just watched him, expression soft and unreadable. For a moment, the only sounds in the bar were the storm outside and the faint buzz of an old neon sign over the counter. The tension was high enough to snap, but the reveal, the truth about who Leah Hartley really was, had not arrived yet, not even close. The night was only beginning. The room hung on a strange edge now, like everyone could feel the temperature drop, even though the heater was still humming. Brandon stood too close to Leah, but she didn't lean away or shift in her seat. Instead, she calmly reached for her coffee cup again, and as she did, her sleeve slid up just half an inch. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A thin scar cut across the skin just above the tattoo. Not messy, not jagged. Straight. The kind of scar that came from something surgical, not something careless. It didn't belong to a bar fight or a clumsy accident. It belonged to someone who had been patched up with precision. Brandon didn't notice the scar, but others did. The older man near the door squinted. A woman at the bar glanced again. Even Diesel paused mid-smirk. Leah's movement stayed steady. Smooth, controlled. When she spoke again, her voice didn't rise or shake. I'm asking you one last time. Leave it alone. The language she used was firm, simple, and direct. No filler words. No nervous rambling. Every syllable landed exactly where it needed to, like she had practiced speaking under pressure. That alone made a few people shift in their seats. Her boots rested lightly on the floor. Not fashion boots, not something bought for style. They were worn at the edges and scuffed at the toes. The kind of wear pattern soldiers had from miles of ruck marches, unexpected terrain, and long nights standing guard. The tread told a quiet story, even if no one in Brandon's group knew how to read it. Leah lifted her eyes again, not at Brandon, but at the window beside her. She watched his reflection instead of turning her head. She scanned the room through glass, tracking shapes the way someone trained to avoid blind spots would. No big movements, just small flickers of awareness, almost invisible. But Pete saw it. He had seen men and women do that before, in airports, gas stations, parking lots. People who noticed things most others missed. People who had spent enough time in dangerous places that vigilance wasn't a habit, it was muscle memory. Pete's hand froze around the rag he'd been holding. I've seen that look before, years ago, he thought, suddenly uneasy. Brandon, completely missing the shift in energy, snorted and waved a dismissive hand at the tattoo again. Who even gets those little lines, he said, laughing to himself. What is that, a discount yoga symbol? Tyler burst out laughing again, and Diesel followed, although his laugh was thinner now, not as sure as before. Leah still didn't react. Her breathing didn't change. Her face didn't tighten. She just lowered her sleeve and wrapped her hands around her coffee again. Her silence wasn't fear. It was something else, something the room could feel but couldn't name. A couple sitting near the wall whispered quietly. Another man stopped scrolling on his phone and glanced over. Even the bartender from the other end of the counter drifted closer without meaning to. Curiosity was slowly replacing amusement. Why wasn't she scared? Why wasn't she angry? Why wasn't she defending herself? Most people, cornered by three men in a bar, would show something: frustration, fear, irritation. Leah showed nothing, and nothing can be far more unnerving than anything else. Brandon paced in a slow half circle, trying to make sense of the feeling he was getting. He'd been in fights before, stupid ones, avoidable ones, but he could always tell when a person was scared. Leah wasn't giving him any of those signs. No quick breaths. No shaking hands. No shrinking posture. It bothered him. His voice lost a bit of its edge as he said, "You think you're better than us or something? Sitting there like you're made of stone?" Leah didn't lift her head. "I never said that." Short answer. Calm, not defensive, not apologetic. It wasn't what he expected. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "She's weird, man," he muttered. "I don't like how she's just staring at nothing." "She's trying to act tough," Diesel added, though his voice lacked confidence. "It's just an act." But even as he said it, he didn't sound sure. Something about Leah's posture, relaxed but alert, made him swallow hard. Pete stepped forward slightly, wiping his hands on his apron as if preparing for something. He didn't know who Leah was, but he was sure of one thing: she wasn't normal. She wasn't helpless, and she definitely wasn't someone to be cornered. Outside, thunder cracked loud enough to rattle the window. Leah didn't flinch. But Brandon did. For a second, the room saw a flash of his nerves before he masked it with another smirk. "All right then," Brandon said, louder than before, trying to regain control. "You're too good to answer? Too good to show your little college tattoo?" Silence pressed in again. The storm outside. The hum of lights. The low murmur of uneasy customers. And in the middle of it all, Leah sat unmoving, untouched by their noise, untouched by their mockery. That kind of calm creates its own gravity. It pulls attention, it raises questions, and it makes even the loudest men wonder what they've stumbled into. Curiosity grew, not just in the crowd, but in everyone watching the story unfold. Something was coming, something no one in that room was prepared for. Brandon had worked himself into a kind of reckless confidence now, the kind men get when they mistake someone else's silence for weakness. He took another slow step toward Leah's table, shaking out his shoulders like he was preparing to prove something no one had asked for. Tyler and Diesel watched with wide grins, expecting him to finally get a reaction. The room felt tighter. Air moved differently. A few customers pretended to focus on their drinks, but kept glancing over the rims of their glasses. Pete's hands stayed flat on the counter, ready to shout or jump in or do something, anything, if this got worse. Brandon leaned over Leah again, closer than before, shadow falling across her hood. "I'm done asking nicely," he muttered. "Show your face." He reached toward her hood, and Leah finally moved. Her hand came up in one smooth, controlled motion, catching his wrist with a grip that wasn't violent but wasn't gentle either. It was perfect, precise leverage, exact angle, no wasted strength. She didn't twist, didn't yank, didn't squeeze. She simply held his wrist where it was, stopping him cold. It was the kind of movement someone trained would make without thinking. Brandon froze. Not because of pain, there was none, but because suddenly his arm wasn't his own anymore. He tried to pull back, but her hold didn't move. It wasn't force, it was technique. A kind he didn't recognize but instinctively respected. The bar went silent in a heartbeat. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Brandon stared down at her hand on his wrist, confusion spreading across his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Something in him understood for the very first time that this woman was not anything like the person he thought he was picking on. A tremor of unease rippled through him. He wasn't in control here. He never had been. Leah released him just as calmly as she'd stopped him. No shove, no threat. Just opened her fingers and let his arm drop back to his side. Her hand returned to her cup. She didn't even look at him. That was somehow more unsettling than anything she could have said. Brandon rubbed his wrist, stepping back 1 inch, then 2. Tyler's smirk fell away. Diesel's eyes darted around, trying to understand what he'd just seen, before anyone could speak. The door to the tavern slammed open with a violent crack. Cold air blasted inside, carrying rain and wind strong enough to push napkins off tables. Everyone turned toward the entrance. A tall man stepped in. He didn't rush. He didn't shake water off his jacket. He didn't shout over the storm. He simply stood there for a moment, letting the door swing shut behind him. The noise of the bar died instantly, fading into an unnatural quiet. Commander Nathan Reddick didn't need to announce who he was. Anyone who had spent time around bases in this region knew him, if not by name, then by reputation. He was a man people stood straighter around without understanding why. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a faint scar cutting across his jaw and eyes, the cold blue of someone who had seen too much and kept it all locked behind a calm exterior. He scanned the room once, and conversations that hadn't even started yet died on tongues. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't need to be. Only after that sweeping assessment did his gaze land on Leah. And something subtle, almost invisible, shifted in his expression. It wasn't shock. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something like recognition. He took one slow step toward her. Pete saw the change too. He stiffened behind the counter, eyes flicking between Leah and the commander. Reddick's boots echoed lightly against the wooden floor as he walked further into the bar, but the sound felt louder because nobody else dared move. His eyes stayed locked on Leah, on her posture, her hands, her stillness. He studied her like he was piecing together a memory. Brandon stepped aside without being told, suddenly unable to meet Reddick's eyes. Tyler swallowed hard. Diesel took a full step back. Reddick's pace stayed steady, controlled, almost measured. He didn't break eye contact the whole way, reading the scene, reading Leah, reading the air around her. He stopped a few feet from her table. Leah didn't look up at first. She kept her gaze on her coffee, her hood still low, her breath still slow and even. Then, almost reluctantly, as if pulled by something she couldn't avoid, she lifted her head and met his eyes. It was only a half second, but Reddick froze. His shoulders locked. His face changed ever so slightly. Something in him recognized what he was seeing. Her posture, her stillness, the faint tattoo, the controlled way she'd redirected the man's wrist. He knew that stance. He knew that calm. He knew that tattoo, or at least, he thought he did. He took a step closer, slow and deliberate, like approaching a ghost he wasn't sure was real. The room felt electric, a strange mix of fear, curiosity, and something else. Respect, maybe, or at least an instinctual understanding that the energy in the room was no longer normal. For the first time all night, Leah shifted, a tiny adjustment of her shoulders. Nothing dramatic, nothing threatening. But that was all Reddick needed. He had seen that gesture before. He had seen it in sandstorms, in ambushes, in briefing rooms before missions that barely made it into classified logs. He knew exactly who moved like that. His chest rose with a slow breath, the kind a man takes when he realizes he's standing in front of someone he once thought was gone. The whole direction of the night shifted in that moment, quietly, without a word spoken. No one in the bar understood what they were witnessing yet. But they were about to. Reddick stopped about 3 feet from Leah's table, boots planted solidly on the wooden floor. The air seemed to tighten around him. Brandon, still rubbing his wrist from earlier, took the silence as a chance to save face. He forced a shaky grin and gestured toward Leah. "Hey, Commander," he said, trying to sound casual. "We're just messing with the tattoo girl over hay." Reddick didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge him. Didn't even blink in his direction. He spoke without raising his voice, but the entire room felt the weight of it. Step away from her. Now. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry. It was final. Brandon froze. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. Men like Reddick didn't need to shout. When they said something, your body listened before your brain caught up. Brandon stepped back without thinking, bumping into Tyler, who nearly dropped his drink. Diesel swallowed so hard his throat clicked. Reddick moved closer, slow and steady. The kind of steady that made every eye in the place follow his steps. Leah lifted her head a little higher, turning slightly toward him. As she did, her hood slipped just enough to expose the tattoo completely. 2 clean, angled lines etched with purpose. Reddick stopped breathing for half a second. His eyes locked onto the tattoo, then onto her face. His jaw tensed. His shoulders straightened. His expression cracked open just enough to show something no one in that bar expected to see from him. Shock. Real shock. He whispered it before he could stop himself, barely a breath but loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Heart, Shadow Team 7. The words dropped like a stone into still water. Instant, electric silence spread across the bar. Every conversation died. Every head turned. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. People looked from Reddick to Leah, confused, trying to understand why a Navy SEAL commander, a man whose presence alone demanded respect, had just reacted like he'd seen someone return from the dead. Leah didn't look away. She didn't deny it. She didn't move to hide the tattoo. She simply closed her eyes, a small, quiet motion that carried more weight than any explanation could. Reddick stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and something deeper. Respect, fear, and grief all tangled together. He knew exactly what that tattoo meant. He knew what that unit had gone through. He knew what had happened to the people who wore that mark, and he had believed Leah Hartley was gone. Lost, buried in a chapter no one dared talk about. But she was sitting here, in a small-town bar, hood up, trying to disappear, while the man who once commanded teams of warriors stood in front of her like he wasn't sure the ground under his feet was real anymore. The rest of the bar could only stare. A room full of people who mocked her, doubted her, dismissed her, now stood frozen as a SEAL commander looked at her the same way soldiers look at heroes they never expected to see again. No one understood the details, but everyone felt the shift. Leah Hartley wasn't a nobody. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't someone to corner. She was someone the commander himself recognized, someone tied to a past the rest of the room couldn't begin to imagine, and the night changed completely. Reddick stood there a long moment, staring at Leah like he was trying to piece together a memory he never expected to face again. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't commanding anymore. It wasn't sharp or demanding like it had been with Brandon. It was soft, almost reverent. "I thought you were gone." Leah held his gaze for a second that felt much longer than it was. Her eyes showed something tired, something bruised, something that had been carried for far too many miles. Her reply came out quiet, steady, like she wasn't answering a question, just stating a fact. "I was." The words cut through the bar with more force than anything Brandon had said all night. Silence took the whole room. Real silence. Heavy, solid, uneasy. People who had been laughing minutes ago now sat completely still. Even the hum of the old lights felt too loud. Pete Rollins, who had been polishing the same glass for the last 5 minutes, stopped moving. His throat tightened. Without saying anything, he reached up and slowly removed his cap. Not out of fear, not out of obligation. Out of respect. The kind his father had taught him, the kind you feel in your bones. Brandon, Tyler, and Diesel looked like they'd been hit by a cold wind that cut straight through them. Their faces drained. Their eyes darted between Leah and Reddick, trying to understand how the quiet woman they'd mocked without hesitation was suddenly the center of something they couldn't comprehend. Reddick finally tore his eyes from Leah and turned toward the 3 men. His face didn't twist in anger. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't yell or threaten. That would have been easier for them. Instead, he spoke with a calm that made the room colder. "Do you have any idea who you put your hands on?" For a second, Brandon tried to form a reply, but nothing came out. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, helpless. Tyler stared at the floor. Diesel shook his head, barely a whisper. "No, sir." Reddick didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push the moment. But the disappointment in his tone, that quiet, lethal disappointment, was enough to make 3 grown men shrink in place. He didn't look at them long. His attention returned to Leah, as though even speaking to the others was a waste of time. Leah finally moved. She set her cup down gently, the soft sound somehow echoing across the room. Then she placed her hands on the table, pushed slightly, and stood. The motion was slow, controlled, the same kind of precision she had shown when she'd stopped Brandon earlier. Her hood slid back completely, revealing her face in full, a thin scar near her hairline. Eyes that carried weight and distance, a posture too balanced to belong to anyone trying to hide. The entire bar saw her for the first time, not the quiet woman in the corner. Not the one with the little tattoo. Not the person they thought was an easy target, but someone trained, hardened, experienced. Someone Reddick himself regarded with a level of respect most people never earned. As she stood, Reddick stepped back, not out of fear, but out of respect, clearing space for her the way a junior officer steps aside for someone who outranks him in everything but official rank. It wasn't about the Navy or the Army or any branch. It was about what she had lived through and what he knew she had survived. Every person in the bar felt that shift, the invisible weight, the gravity of who she was. Brandon swallowed hard, his earlier confidence gone without a trace. Tyler couldn't even look at her. Diesel stood stiff, hands trembling slightly. Pete lowered his head, holding his cap to his chest. Reddick's eyes softened again as he watched Leah. The moment hit the room with the force of truth finally revealed. Everyone mocked the tattoo, until her hood came off and the SEAL commander froze. And in that frozen moment, no one in the bar saw Leah Hartley as forgettable ever again. Leah didn't say anything after she stood. She didn't scold the men, didn't ask for an apology, didn't demand respect. She simply reached for her hood, slipped it back over her head, and turned toward the exit. The room parted for her without anyone needing to be told. People stepped aside quietly, eyes lowered, as if moving out of the way of someone sacred. Reddick followed her, not out of obligation, but out of something far more personal. When she reached the doorway, he caught up and pulled it open for her. Wind pushed against them, rain misting the air, but neither seemed to notice. They stepped outside together, letting the door close behind them and seal the silence inside. They didn't speak right away. The storm covered the space, rain tapping against the pavement like distant footsteps. Finally, Reddick said, almost too softly, "I thought we lost everyone from your side." Leah kept her eyes on the parking lot lights. "We did," she said, "just not all at once." Reddick nodded. He understood the meaning beneath the words. The teammates who didn't make it home. The pieces of yourself that don't come back even when your body does. The ghosts that stay louder than the world around you. "Does it ever get quieter?" he asked. Leah shrugged gently. "Some days." "Not many." They stood there for another moment, rain gathering at the edges of their boots. Two people who had faced darkness most people would never hear about. Two people who didn't need to explain anything because the weight was familiar to both. Some scars never show on the skin, the narrator reflects. They live in the silence between breaths. Leah finally gave Reddick a small nod. Not a goodbye, more like a quiet understanding. She walked toward the edge of the lot, disappearing into the storm as calmly as she had walked into the bar earlier. She didn't look back. Inside, the room stayed strangely still. Reddick stepped back in, water dripping from his jacket. The three men who had bothered Leah stared down at their drinks, ashamed, overwhelmed, not sure what to do with the weight sitting in their chests. Pete was the first to speak. His voice cracked slightly. "Commander, who was she?" Reddick didn't answer right away. He pulled out a chair, sat, and exhaled slowly, like he was trying to settle the memories Leah had stirred up. Finally, he said, "She carried more weight than any of them will ever understand." "Treat people gently. You never know what they've survived." Pete lowered his head. Brandon closed his eyes. For the first time all night, nobody in the bar wanted to be loud. The storm outside eased a little, as if the sky itself was letting out a long breath. The narrator closes with a quiet truth. Real strength doesn't shout. It simply stands when the world misunderstands it. Leah's footsteps faded into the rain, but the weight of her presence stayed behind. The bar felt different now, quieter, more thoughtful. People who had judged her by a faint tattoo and a hooded sweatshirt were left wondering what else they had missed, not just about her, but about others who move through the world carrying battles no one sees. That's the truth about so many veterans. Their stories don't always show on their faces. Their strength isn't in the noise they make, but in the burdens they carry with quiet dignity. Leah reminded everyone in that room, and everyone listening now, that respect should never be something we give only to those who look the part. It should be instinct, kindness, human decency. Honor the quiet ones. They've earned it more than you know. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.